Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast Series. This episode is titled Summertime Black Drum Fishing. I'm going to be speaking with Captain Steve Von Voigt of Reel 'em Up Fishing Charters. He operates out of the Southport, Oak Island area, and we're going to be covering such topics as how to find good spots, bait choices for those spots, the better conditions to target, and we're going to talk about strategy techniques. A lot to talk about. My name is Gary Hurley of Fisherman's Post. Fisherman's Post has been serving the saltwater fishing community since 2003. We've been bringing you fishing reports, fishing information, fishing tournaments, fishing schools, and here in this latest chapter, the Fisherman's Post Saltwater Podcast Series, where we reach out to our captain and guide friends from up and down the North Carolina coast and ask them to share with us their insights, their knowledge on how to catch more fish more often. I'm joined in this podcast endeavor by my podcast partner, David Harden of Harden Creative Media. Welcome to another show, David Harden.
Hello, Gary.
Good to see you, man.
How you doing?
Doing good. Good to be working. Good to be talking with Steve here in a minute.
Talking to black drum. You know, you'll find this hard to believe, but I've never caught a black drum.
I don't find that hard to believe. You didn't shock me in the slightest bit.
That's good. I'm just saying, but I'm looking forward to it. I would have been
more surprised if you said, I catch black drum.
I caught one today at work.
I mean, when we do the lizardfish podcast, we're going to have you ask the questions.
I cannot wait. I could be the guest captain on the lizardfish, toadfish.
I believe you could. But we've got to get back to business.
We do. And speaking of business, we have some great sponsors to talk about. Port City Signs and Graphics is one of our great sponsors.
Yes, we love Sabrina and crew at Port City Signs and Graphics. They take care of all my sign needs, and that's leaderboard logos, that's banners, that's stickers, and feather flags. The list goes on, man. Port City Signs and Graphics has been Fisherman's Post go-to for, I don't know, at least a decade, since they've been in business.
Do you think you can identify a sign that was made by Port City Signs and Graphics?
I do. I feel like I could.
Okay, well, let's have a little exercise here.
All right.
I'm going to show you two signs.
Two signs.
One was made by Port City Signs and Graphics. The other one was made by someone else.
Oh, I'll be all over this.
Okay. All right. Stand by. Here we go. Here's the first sign. It is an auto glass manufacturer. Their sign says, "Show us your crack."
Huh? Show us your crack. Now,
auto glass.
I could make a call right now, but I think I want to wait to see the second sign.
Okay, here's the second sign.
It's
a nice 3D rendered Life Church sign being installed by a bucket truck.
Yeah, they got the logo up front. Then they have a thicker font for life and a lighter for church. I'm going to go ahead and say Sabrina Davis is responsible for Life Church.
You're exactly right, 100%.
Man, love those guys.
So we have another sponsor,
Thank goodness.
Marine Warehouse Center.
Oh, speaking of guys I love, Marine Warehouse Center, sales, service, parts.
We have a video too.
I love videos.
Let's watch it.
Matt with Marine Warehouse, excited to give you guys a huge update. We're now carrying Seabourn and Spider boat line. Of course, we have the newest models of Carolina Skiff, Sailfish, Sea Chaser, and Pan Marine. With over 60 boats in stock at a Wilmington location, let's schedule a sea trial and let's get you on the water today.
That's right. They want to get you on the water today.
I'd go on the water today.
They want to get you they want to take care. And now I tell you, they take care of my boat. They take care of the Fisherman's Post boat. And I'm a huge fan of them. And I tell people this, because they fish our tournaments, man, they're part of the fishing community. They're part of the boating community. They're not just out to make a buck. Of course they want to make a buck. They're a business. But they are part of the fishing community, part of the boating community. And I also like to remind people, they reached out to me and said, "Hey, man, we love the podcast. We want to sponsor the podcast," because they're in tune, man. They like it. They want to support.
But if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, all you need to do is just contact Fisherman's Post, and you can also be a sponsor.
You can go to the website. You can find contact information. Email me, call me. We'll talk about it. But I am starting to vet sponsors a little bit.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because One of the owners at Marine Warehouse Center, man, he just cannot help himself. And I'm talking about Terrell. I'm talking about terrible Terrell. I mean,
Poor Terrell.
I wonder if I'm the only person that calls him terrible Terrell. Boy, I would hate if other people were to go to Marine Warehouse Center and go, "Hey, where's terrible Terrell?" God, that would be horrible.
That would be a terrible nickname.
Please don't do that. But the reason I refer to him as terrible Terrell is he can't help but just call me, text me, tell me jokes. And again, this episode is no different. Would you like to hear it?
I would love to hear it.
All right. To be clear, this is a Terrell joke, not my joke. And he says, 3 conspiracy theorists walk into a bar. And you're going to try to tell me that's not a coincidence?
A good one. Another solid.
Is it a good
solid.
One?
Yeah.
Is it though?
It was good. It was good. Yeah. Maybe it brightened my day.
Well, also on the website, if you go to the Fisherman's Post website, you'll see that we have member benefit. We have premium content now, including podcast premium content. So if you enjoy the podcast and want to support the podcast, if you become a member, then you get early access to podcast releases. Yes, you get to see podcasts 1 week before we release them to the public. And even more, in addition, we have bonus content of every podcast. It's about 15 minutes of content where we continue the conversation after the podcast to circle back on certain topics, expand on new topics, ask other questions. So if you would like access to that bonus content, if you like access to podcasts 1 week earlier, then go to fishermanspost.com and look for member benefits or premium content.
Solid gold content.
Solid gold content. But this podcast always wraps up with David's best takeaways. So a reminder, David.
That's right.
I need you paying attention to what Steve has to say about black drum fishing, because you are how this show is going to end when I come back to you for David's best takeaway.
Copy that. My pen and paper are ready.
All right. Well, now it is my pleasure to welcome first-time guest to the podcast, first time making his podcast appearance, Captain Steve Von Voigt. Reel them up, fishing charters out of the Southport, Oak Island area. Steve, a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
The pleasure is mine, Gary. I appreciate it, man. I'm happy to be here. I've listened to quite a bit of them, so now that I get to talk about it, it's cool.
I like that. I like that journey. You listen to the podcast, watch the podcast, and now you are a podcast guest yourself. Man, look at you. Like you're giving hope to all those kids out there who are thinking, man, I want to be like Steve one day.
Oh man, don't say that. Easy now. I'm just kidding. No, it's cool, man. It's full circle. Listen to it when I was getting into it. Haven't been guiding too long. I've been fishing my whole life, but it's cool.
Well, listen, no matter what nice things you say about the podcast, you still, like every captain, have to get through 2 questions before we get to the primary content. You tell me you're ready. I give you question number 1.
I'm ready for it.
Question number 1, Steve Von Voigt. Captain Steve Von Voigt, why should we listen to anything you have to say about a black drum?
Well, I catch a lot of them. I've been fishing for them, most of my life, living in Southport. I've been down here 20 years now. Been fishing ever since my friends had John boats and we were getting on them and fishing in the creeks, and that was pretty much what I've been catching since I've been growing up. Sometimes we catch small ones, sometimes we catch big ones, but we catch a lot of them. So.
All right. I will accept that answer. You get to move on to question number 2. Again, you tell me you're ready. I give you question number 2.
Let's go with number 2.
All right. Question number 2. I looked at Von Voigt thinking to myself, all right, either this guy's German or he presents as German. So if you were to order 3 drinks at a German bar holding up your fingers, what would that look like?
Okay. Holding up my fingers. 3 beers about this big, probably.
But how do you tell them 3? How do you tell them the number 3? You fail. You're not German. You're a poser.
No good.
In fact, you're a spy, because if you had seen Inglourious Bastards, have you seen that movie?
It's been a while.
That's 3, and
Like
that Inglourious Bastards has told me that's 3 in German, not that. That's how the spy gets caught out.
Hey, a little fun fact about me, though, Gary. I'm mostly Italian. Isn't that crazy?
Well, that doesn't help my shtick at all. Like that doesn't mean anything to me right now,
I'm sorry.
because I was so proud of myself for this little bit.
Very German last name, though. If I had $1 for every time somebody spelled it wrong, I'd have, maybe I could buy another bet. I don't know.
Well, let's get to Black Drum. Let's get to the primary content. And I think the first topic that you put in your show notes you want to talk about is probably the question that most people have, like, where do I go to catch a black drum? How do I figure out where to go? What makes for a good spot? So I'm going to get out of the way and let you talk about spots.
Cool. Spots, man. There's so many spots. There's so much to talk about with black drum. Where we fish in the Cape Fear River. Out of the Cape Fear River, it's muddy bottom, most of it. There's a little bit of sand. There's a couple sandbars, but a lot of it's real muddy, dirty water. It's not pretty and clear. You go up toward Wrightsville Beach, toward Snows Cut, Carolina Beach area. The water gets a lot cleaner than ours. That river's dirty. The water's dirty. But it's muddy bottom, so we got to worry about that. What we're looking for in spots, I guess I could, the first thing I want to start with is probably off the Cape Fear River. If you were in any tidal creek, you're going to be looking for shade, docks, oysters, feeder creeks, bulkheads. The list goes on. The black drummer, they really hang tight to structure. So when you're looking for a spot, you're looking for any kind of structure, a point sticking out. You see a bunch of oyster rocks, or you see shells in a shell bank, and that bank might be going down deeper, and you get close to it on your depth finder, and maybe there's some depth to it. You're fishing shelly bottom, muddy bottom, oystery bottoms. So when you're looking for a spot, you're definitely looking for that good structure. Anything from pilings to sandbars to, like I said, bulkheads and docks. It's all there, and it's where they're going to be hanging out around.
Okay, I have a question, man, and maybe I heard you correctly, maybe not. Are you saying that not just structure, but structure in shade? Was that the way you let it off, like looking in the shade for places like that in the shade?
And this is part of the conditions, I would feel like, but it's your water temp matters. They're just like us. When it's hot, they're going to want to get out of that hot part of the sun a lot of times, and I'll throw in the shady part under a dock, or let's say it's under a boat lift, something like that, and there's a boat on it, and there's a little bit of shade. Sometimes just throwing in that shade, it kind of helps them. They'll be hiding underneath that. Let's say there's a big boat parked under at a dock, docked up. Throw up under that boat, there might be some drum under there hiding under the in the shade, over by the structure, of course, but definitely in the shade. So that's been helping me a little bit too. Sometimes it's not just you're not tossing under the right dock. You're not tossing in the right spot of the dock. You could toss all the way up under it, and then he might be laying over there, getting out of that sun. The water's been getting hot. The temperatures are climbing. I mean, we're in the mid 80s at lower tides. This morning it was probably around 78, 79 degrees. By the end of the day, it was 85 degrees, so the water's hot. They're just like us. They're going to want to get out of that hotter water and get in that cooler temp.
So would this extend to, like, you wouldn't want to target a spot in the morning where the sun rising would hit it first thing? Like you would rather hit a spot that doesn't get sun until the sun set, and vice versa? Is it to that extent?
I would say just more watch your water temperatures, because this morning, like 79 degrees is pretty water. I mean, that's everything's kind of moving around, moving with the tide, looking for bait. They're probably up under the docks. They're hugging the structure and stuff like that, depending on what the tide's doing. But when the water temp does noticeably start rising, like you were out that morning, it was 78, 79 degrees. Then you start seeing 82 about mid-morning. It's getting a lot hotter. Sometimes just throwing in that shade, or maybe you're fishing under a bridge, you're fishing bridge pilings on the other side of wherever you may be, where that sun is not hitting. They may be hiding in that shady part over there. For one, it's a little bit darker as far as camouflage and hiding themselves, but for two, man, I just really think they're just like they're like us. They want to get out of that sun, so they're blocking themselves from it and hanging out in those shady areas. And you get bycatch like flounder. Flounder like to do that too. I mean, I know we're talking about red drum, but sometimes throwing in that shady area will affect your bite. Sometimes you get that fish hanging out in that shade, and you're not dealing with the pinfish and the bycatch, the croakers and things like that. If you're throwing, let's say, toward the front of the dock where the boat lift might not be covering up, any or making any shade because of where the sun is, you could possibly avoid that bycatch by throwing it deeper into the hole or deeper under the dock. for that shade.
Okay. I want to spend more time on spots just because like we set it up. I mean that, if someone's doing everything right, but they're not where the fish are, it's not going to help them out that much.
Oh yeah.
So if we were to sort of slow down and kind of go through your list a little bit and maybe expand on each one, and I guess to start it, to give you an idea, like, all right, like if we're talking about oyster rocks or oyster bar, whatever the language is, it's referred to in different ones, like people see them all over the place. So what gets you more excited? If I were to pluck you out of Southport Oak Island and I would push you in the Swansboro area, just as for example, what would you be looking for from oyster rocks, oyster bars that would give you more confidence in one over another?
If we were to do that exact scenario, I would be looking for a good rip off an oyster rock. Be looking at the tide. Which way is the tide moving? I'd want to set my boat up beside that oyster rock to where I can fish behind that rock, and sometimes it makes a good eddy. So they may be hiding in that eddy behind that oyster rock, behind the current, waiting on something to come by. So if I'm fishing an oyster rock, I'm definitely looking for like a current eddy, or something for them to get behind. Potentially even bait swimming around there. You may see some shrimp popping around these oyster rocks, especially at lower tides. It could be a little bit deeper if you threw your bait over there on that deeper side. Over by that oyster rock, there could be some fish over there, and that could be the whole reason why those shrimp or whatever, those mullet or something, were jumping. So, oyster rocks are really, really good target for your black drum. They're going to be all over those. You're going to get your bycatch around them too as well, but they do stick to oyster rocks, and they always slide by them looking for food, depending on what the tide's doing and when the water's moving. So, usually we're trying to catch them from A to B, and an oyster rock is always a really good choice for a black drum.
So what would be the water depth that you would like to see around, on the down current side of an oyster rock? Like, I guess, what is ideal or what is minimum, or, what are your thoughts there?
Right. And that's important too, because you want to avoid your snags. You're going to be throwing toward the oyster rocks, and I'm fishing with Carolina rigs, but we're throwing right next to an oyster rock, so you're going to break off a lot. You want to find an oyster rock that has a deeper shelf, or maybe it has a bigger drop off at a low tide, and you see it's dropping off really far. Maybe you come back at that higher tide and you fish closer to that rock, but where that drop off is, and you sit your bait over there. Use a good amount of weight. Depends on what the tide's doing. Maybe the tide's not pushing too hard. You don't need too much weight. Maybe it is. But you want to have it near that rock, because they're going to be coming by it at either tide. I would say anywhere between like 3 and 15 feet. If the tide's real low and it's sticking out, and you have 4 foot next to that rock, that may be a good spot for that rock, because there's a little bit of depth by it, and the bottom could be very shelly, could be oystery. There's still bait hanging out around it, and they'll be hanging out around that rock. 15 foot, maybe the oyster rock is underwater, and that oyster rock is there. You've been there before. You throw around that rock, or you don't want to throw on it, because we're just going to break off, and then you're tying, and I say this all the time: if you're not breaking off, you're not fishing the good structure. So, but you may break off. So, try and throw around that rock, and if it's 15 foot and it's there, throw around those deeper spots, and they may be just hanging out around that oyster rock, eating bait off it, eating crabs off it and stuff.
All right, let's play that same scenario now, but using docks as our main habitat. And I guess, again, like if I were to pluck you out of Southport Oak Island and put you in the Topsail area, what kind of docks, or what surrounding habitat to a dock gives you more confidence in one over another?
I like to fish older docks, docks that have a lot of growth on them, and not all of them do. And sometimes, like if you were in the Topsail area, they're not all older docks, and the Oak Island area, a lot of them are. Southport area, Bald Head, stuff like that. A lot of them are older docks. So I like to fish these old docks. The more growth, the better. The more stuff I think they have on them or over them, or all that stuff. I like to fish the older ones. anything that has a bulkhead by it, bulkheads are always good. So if you see a big bulkhead with a dock, I mean, sometimes it's shallow when you creep up by them, but maybe at a higher tide, that bulkhead could have black drum all over it. It all depends on where you are, obviously, and um, if you're in a smaller creek or a bigger creek, because some of these docks are in big, big wide open areas, they could be really good. Some of them are in smaller creeks, so they could be really good too because you have a lot of water funneling through these smaller creeks, and could good current rips off these docks. The pilings make current rips off the docks. They have structure on them. There could be, as a bycatch, even sheep's head, but black drum love that same stuff. They hang out around all that good structure.
What about my water depth question as it relates to docks? Is it like a certain minimum amount of water or an ideal amount of water?
I mean, it all depends on your tide, but anywhere between 3 and, it could be 20 foot deep at certain docks, especially if you're fishing like, the intercoastal area. Um, what's more important to me, I think, about water depth too is, keeping your bait down. They're going to be toward the bottom most of the time. They're going to be looking at, swimming around the structure looking for bait. Just making sure you can keep your bait down there by that structure is, I would say, the most important part. But for depth, I would say anywhere between 3 and 20 feet is going to be good to fish for docks. And it all comes back to tide, which I know we're going to talk about. But yeah, it's a good thing to look for. Just pilings in general, bulkheads in general. If let's say there's a big bulkhead and there's oysters coming off it, and you've been by there and there's oysters all near that bulkhead. At a higher tide, you can go back there, and that may be a really good spot for them. They may be hanging out by it. So.
Do you find, and I know that anything is possible, or most things are possible with fishing, so anything can happen. But as far as dock fishing for black drum, will those black drum, move, sometimes hang out closer to the shoreline, sometimes hang out at the end of the dock? I mean, is that something that you put into play when you're targeting a dock, trying to find if a black drum's hanging out?
It is, and that's important. I just think your depth plays in that as well. If it's really shallow up by the front, or like toward that bulkhead, where that dock is. If that bulkhead's real shallow, but down by the dock there may be a boat over there, so it's a little deeper because they have a boat in over there. You might want to throw a little bit deeper, or in that deeper section, and then maybe at a higher tide, you throw it back there by the where the bulkhead may be, where you thought it was shallow. When that tide rises, you may be able to pick one off over there because they're cruising those banks, they're cruising those bulkheads, they're riding by all that stuff just to, looking for bait and looking for food and following tides usually. So there's always a good chance that something might slide by the very front at a bigger tide, or maybe at a lower tide, it could be way out by the dock, which you never know. You could be fishing a dock that's 20 feet long, or you could be fishing a dock that's 50, 500 feet long. And if you have a chance to, fish all of it, and you can, you just never know when they're going to be there because it's all good structure.
Okay, to maybe finish up or move towards the end of the conversation about spots before we move on to bait choices. So oyster rocks and docks also, I guess, included bulkheads. I know you gave a little bit of a laundry list to sort of start this conversation. Is there another like big one, another main type of structure that you like to target other than docks or oyster rocks, or are those the top two?
There definitely is. I was going to say feeder creeks as well. So these small ditch creeks that are off of your bigger creeks, estuaries, whatever you want to call them, these bigger openings in creek mouths, there's going to be a bunch of small little feeder ditch creeks in those. Some of them are deep, some of them aren't, but a lot of times you can find them going in or out of those. So if you're ever curious about, you pass a little feeder creek, there may be oysters by it, there may be grass by it, whatever it may be. But if you see a little creek, it's always worth it to try and stop and throw something in it. Whether you throw it super deep in it, or the tide may be falling and you throw it right at the very mouth and just wait on something. A feeder creek is always going to be really good for black drum, and there may be more than one coming out of that creek. As we all know, everything goes in the grass and eats. So when the tide's falling, if they're coming out of the grass, they got to go somewhere. And a lot of times the first place they're going to hit is those little ditch creeks and feeder creeks to come out of, and they'll just be hitting bait on the way out. And your bait might be in the way and they might grab it. So a feeder creek's also a really good spot to hit if you can find a good one. Sometimes even the smaller ones are even better than the bigger ones. You never really know what you're going to catch sliding out of those.
All right. So now I'm going to give you one more question before we move on.
Yes, sir.
And again, I'm going to use my setup where I pluck you out of Southport Oak Island, and this time I put you in Moorhead.
It's a good deal.
So I'm going to let you go to one spot. It's summertime. It's July. I'm going to let you go to one spot. Only your choice: Oyster Rock, Dock, or Feeder Creek. And you haven't fished any of these areas, so it's all blind to you. What's the one main choice you're going to make?
I'm going to fish a dock.
Okay.
I'm gonna fish a dock, and I'm gonna find the oldest looking dock with some current running by it, and I'm gonna throw my weight on it, whatever I think is appropriate to keep it by that dock, and I'm gonna fish the whole dock and figure out if there's anything on it.
All right, that's a good tell. I'm glad I asked that question. So now let's transition to bait choices, and again, this is summertime black drum fishing. So focusing on these summer months. Again, this is being released in July. And, people will certainly be fishing for black drum all summer. So with an emphasis on summertime, what do you have to tell us about bait choice?
Bait choice is important depending on where you are. A lot of times the pilings that we're fishing on these docks are going to be full of all kinds of fish. There's going to be a bunch of stuff swimming around it. There's going to be bait swimming around it. They may not always want the pogies and stuff. It all depends on how big your black drum are that are sitting there. But what I always use and what's always a go-to to me is dead shrimp. Head on dead shrimp as fresh as I can get them. Luckily, I have a really good bait guy, and I can get them in bulk. I get these frozen live or frozen dead, shrimp. And head on, I usually hook the whole shrimp on there, because if a big black drum wants it, he wants that whole shrimp. So, just going off of that, I think shrimp's going to be your number one for the black drum. They always hit them. They love them. You're going to get a lot of bycatch with them, which is very typical, but it's more of a numbers game. So if you're fishing a dock, how many fish are there? Are you catching croaker after croaker after croaker after croaker on your bait? Maybe it's time to switch that spot, but the shrimp are going to get everything fired up. Usually when there's little fish, there's big fish. Sometimes those drum don't want it, but I do love this shrimp, man. They really do go after those pretty hard.
All right. I guess I'm not surprised that shrimp leads off the conversation.
Yeah.
So what else, would you want to have on the boat, or what else might work if shrimp wasn't available, or you just wanted to give them another look?
Definitely mud crabs and fiddler crabs. I catch a lot of black drum on the mud crabs and fiddler crabs, and sometimes that's bycatch from sheep's head fishing, which teaches me a lot about the black drum here recently, especially. They've been biting the fiddler crabs just as much as they've been biting the shrimp, and most of it is around hard structure, because they are looking for crabs when they are up in the grass or on those oyster rocks. They're looking for mud crabs. They're looking for fiddler crabs, looking for their shrimp, looking for really even small blue crabs, which I don't typically use for bait, but they're looking for all that. They're eating crustaceans just like the sheep's head are. They're after all that good stuff in the oyster rocks. They're picking around that stuff, and that's why they're always good. They're after all that stuff that's crawling around the pilings. They're not eating barnacles and stuff like the sheep's head are, but everything that's running around there, they're definitely chasing too. Depending on even bulkheads and stuff, like there's shrimp popping around them at lower tides and stuff. There could be black drum waiting to eat all those at maybe even higher tides. So they're going to be around. They're going to be eating shrimp. They're going to be eating crabs, peeler crabs even. I've gotten peeler crabs and used those before at current rips on docks and stuff, and I've caught big black drum doing that, man. They just really do love the crabs and the shrimp, I swear.
All right, man. I think what I'm going to do now is say, I believe you've already said Carolina rigs. I'm guessing that's the main rig. Is that really just about the only rig you use for black drum fishing?
Not necessarily. I do use bottom sweepers from time to time. It all depends on what I know the bottom is like. If I know the bottom is real sandy up in a creek, sometimes you use a bottom sweeper jig, a bigger one, and keep that crab down or keep that piece of shrimp down, and they'll be on the bottom searching for it and Shrimp's got that smell. I mean, everything knows it's there. It almost feels like it gets taken every instant, and especially in the summertime, you got all that bycatch around it. But it's like I said, it's a numbers game. So if you're getting picked off and picked off and picked off, maybe move a duck up, picked off, you might get a black drum the very next one. That bite can turn on at any time. The bottom sweeper jigs, definitely. The Carolina jigs, or I'm sorry, the Carolina rig is obviously going to be, your my number one choice, but a lot of people's number one choice as well. I'm typically using 3/4 ounce to 1 ounce, all the way up to 2 ounce, depending on where I'm fishing. It could be a heavy current. You need 2-3 ounces to keep it down. You could be offshore off the beach, and there could be a heavy current. You could be fishing a wreck, something like that for drum, and need a bigger weight. But your weight plays a big part in that, and everybody uses the Carolina rig, so everyone knows kind of what you're needing for what kind of structure you're fishing, and just to keep your bait down.
Okay, for a Carolina rig specifically for black drum fishing, what's the hook you use? What's the leader you use? Like you're using fluoro, a mono, and what pound test? Like and how long? Like walk me through
Yep.
like your preferred Carolina rig specifically for black drum.
Yep. It's funny you say that about the length. Like right off the bat, I have horror stories about it. I've lost some of like the best drum I've ever had because I've made too long of a leader, like a 2-foot leader. Big black drum on them. They tail whip it. They got a hard, heavy tail, and they break that 20 pound, which is what I use. I use 20 pound fluorocarbon leader. So I started going to a smaller leader, about a foot. Would be the longest I would say from your very tip of your swivel to the tip of your hook. You want about a foot of length. I think is any more than that, sometimes I think you have a big chance of breaking off when you have a bigger fish. I mean, I had one right up next to the boat, tail whipped it, broke that leader. He was a big fish. 20 pound is, you can catch a lot more than you think on it if you really baby the fish. Depends on how big it is and how hard it's pulling, obviously, and what kind of structure you're around. He could pull you in some structure, but the smaller leader is giving me more success, I think. And like I said, I use a 20 pound leader, and I use a number 2 owner Mewtwo circle hook. The circle hooks really help you. You don't got to set it as much. You just lift up or start reeling, and usually it does that hook for itself. But usually we get perfect hook sets on them. The Mewtwo is small enough for those small black, or the number 2 is small enough for those small black drum to hit. And I've caught even really really big black drum on them too. So they're good tough hooks, and that's usually what I go with. So fluoro 12-inch leader, and number 2 circle Mewtwo light circle hook.
When you're putting shrimp on a Carolina rig, are you I guess mostly trying to put the whole shrimp on? And what can you tell us about how you put a whole shrimp on a hook? I guess it's one, to make it effective, and two, to try to keep it on the hook as long as possible in a world where other things other than black drum are trying to take that shrimp off. I mean, have you found anything that helps?
Actually, yeah. Keeping it frozen, like keeping it as cold as you possibly can. Like if you can possibly even freeze your shrimp and then keep it on ice, and then put it back on your hook. And I usually bend them in like a U because I use them with the head on. And when they're swimming like that, when they're swimming and they're popping and stuff, the shrimp escape in like a U form. They like swim backwards like that. So I always take my shrimp and I hook them in that U, and I'll put them through the hook. I'll carry them all the way up the hook, and I'll turn the hook, and I'll put it one more time through the tail. So I double hook it. I make sure that shrimp's nice and firm, because when they start getting real soft, those little fish, I mean, they can grab the tail of it and pull the whole thing off of it. So you really want your shrimp to be firm, if you can get them as firm as you can, or even like close to frozen. Really really helps with the bycatch. You might have a pinfish pulling on it, and you can feel it pulling on it, and then all of a sudden your shrimp is gone because your shrimp was all mushy. But if he's trying to take the head off a frozen shrimp, it's not going to be as easy for him to do because it's still an icicle. But they all still know they're down there. The black drums still hit them when they're nice and cold like that, and I think that really helps with keeping them on the hook better.
All right. Same question now, I guess, with mud crab or fiddler crab. Man, what's your technique for hooking those?
Straight through the bottom, straight through the back. What I try and do with the fiddler crabs is, instead of poking it through the hole, like let's say you got a fiddler crab, it's a 1/2 inch long. It's not a very big one. You're using small hooks. Number 2s are very small. Needle point too. They're super sharp. You can get them through that bait without killing them a lot of times, but what I like to do is pick a corner of the crab, and I like to stick it to the very back of it to like the left or the right side. And a lot of times they won't kill it. You're not like braining it or killing that bait, and he'll be down there flapping his arms and moving his claw and stuff, and still be kind of alive. And they know they're down there when they're doing that. You got bait freaking out, you got a crab freaking out on your hook down there. They're going to run over there and investigate it, and a lot of times you'll get a good bite off of them. You're going to get your bycatch off of crabs too. What was I catching the other day? Pinfish on them and a bunch of puffer fish actually, fishing hard structures. So there's going to be other things that want to bite your crab too, but that helps. I think that helps them. That little movement that they have down there, that when they're not dead on the hook but they're on the hook, really helps the fish know they're there. Sometimes it makes a difference in throwing a crab on and it just dying right away, and you throw him out and he's not moving at all. So you really want to have a little bit of movement on him on the hook, especially when you're using a bigger crab.
Okay, man. Let's go to, again, the talking point was best conditions or preferred conditions. And I think most of that conversation, or at least the start of that conversation with you, is going to circle around tides, which you've already inferred when we're talking about spots. But let's go there now and, just sort of fine tune how we're going to pick a spot or how we're going to approach a spot depending on the conditions.
So the conditions are important. Obviously, tide has mostly to do with everything we're talking about. As far as water depth, your drop offs, your structure, what your structure looks like, what you can see above the water line versus what's below the water line. It all comes into play with the tide. We can start with like a high tide falling. If I were fishing, you're gonna want to find your structure that's starting to come out of the water. Your oyster rocks are starting to show. You try and find that deeper water around those oyster rocks that are showing, because what you're doing is you're trying to get these fish that are going from A to B. They may not be going far, but they're definitely traveling with the tide. They may be in a feeder creek going from A to B, or maybe that feeder creek dries up in an hour and they may be coming out of there because they were up there eating bait. So the tide has a lot to do with your spot choice. And your water depth. The docks that we're fishing are usually, like I said, 3 to 15, 20 feet long or 20 feet deep. If it's a longer dock and that tide's, and they had a bulkhead, that tide is way, way up. Maybe everything in that bulkhead's pulling out by the end of that dock. You might want to fish by the end of that dock at a falling tide and see if everything's coming out from out there back inside. Same thing with the oyster rock. Like I said, I already said the feeder creek, but the oyster rock, if that oyster rock is there and it's a high tide and it's falling, you might want to position your boat over by that eddy and see if you can catch something behind that eddy of that oyster rock, because they're swimming around there, or in that depth by that oyster rock, or drop off by that oyster rock. Just see if you can find something. So,
all right. Well, walk me through a little bit more scenarios then. If that's the high fall scenario, what about the low fall scenario?
So a low tide rising, a lot of times I like to look very hard at the docks. Everything. A lot of the creeks I fish are one way in, one way out. There's smaller creeks. By that I mean, if it's low tide, they can't get in the grass. There's only one way to get in that creek. It's a dead end at the very end. They may be coming in that creek to go eat a bunch of bait. You might want to fish that very first dock on that pile, or that very first piling in that very first, where that creek starts, because everything that's coming in that creek has to go by this very first dock, and vice versa with the tide falling. Everything that's coming out of that creek may have to slide right by that dock just to get out of that creek. So those are good spots to hit. The first dock in any creek could be the best dock to fish. It all depends on how new it is. If it's a brand new dock, I don't usually do that. If it's an older dock, a lot of times, it's a good one to fish. You want to check your water depth around it, but the tide's really important for that when you're fishing those docks. Depending on what it's doing, rising or falling. Another thing I wanted to say about the rising tide, if you can find a sandbar or something like that, and it's a deeper drop off that side. At a rising tide, I like to fish those sandbars because a lot of times they'll make a big eddy. Everything's trying to eat everything that's coming off of that sandbar, or the water's flowing over that sandbar barely, and then they're hanging out on the other side of it. So I do pretty good, in the creeks like that if there's a sandbar and the tide's starting to fill it in.
So I guess one thing I'm thinking of as you're sort of talking about dock fishing and oyster bar fishing. So you're always casting, or most often casting. You're very rarely just dropping down. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely always casting. I want to keep a good distance between what we're fishing and you. I mean, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're only fishing a creek 10 foot wide, but I usually try and give the fish some distance and, keep my trolling motor away from them or whatever I'm using. I may even have the motor on. It all depends on how deep I'm fishing. If I'm fishing deeper water, I may not turn my motor off. But you definitely want to, keep by that structure, but be able to cast toward it. This way you can kind of let your bait do the thing and not worry about your boat getting in the way of any of that. And a lot of times when you're fishing structure and you're on a boat, you don't want to bang your boat against all that stuff, all those, it's not like sheep's head fishing where you got to be right up on them and drop them, all that. A lot of times those drum are going to be swimming around. They may even be right off the structure. So you kind of want to be a little bit off of it too.
And is often the goal when you're casting to find relief from the current? Like, is that what you're trying to do? Either behind an oyster bar, down current oyster bar, down current of the dock pylons? Is that how you're like coaching your guests, your clients on the boat? Or are you personally like, I want to cast it and have it land right by that dock pylon on the down current side?
Yeah, we usually do fish down current, and a lot of that has to do with me just using my trolling motor. I don't have a power pole or anything, so a lot of times I'm at the mercy of the wind or the tide, whatever one's stronger. But I always like to think, if I throw with the tide, then my bait's going to be stuck down there. If I have enough weight on it, it's going to be where I want it, where the structure is. You can throw up current, of course. There's nothing wrong with throwing up current. You never know what's going to run to it, or if there's a good dock and you're fishing in between it and you want to fish down current of it, that's always good. But like I said, they can be off that structure too. They're not always stuck to it, and it all depends on what's around, what kind of bait's around. If there's an oyster by that dock, if there's an oyster or a grass bed by those oysters, or whatever it may be, they're not always attached to that structure. They could be a little bit off of it, but that's another reason why we park or anchor a little further away from them, so we can cast over to them. But I always prefer fishing off the back of the boat and fishing with the tide, so we don't have to worry about tangling your trolling motor up, or if your line starts running toward you too fast and you may not have enough weight or whatever it may be. But they're definitely usually it's easier to fish back from where the current's going, especially if you're fishing structure.
Okay. I have a couple other questions, but before we sort of leave, like better or best conditions. Again, we've had a pretty good conversation about spots, locations, and now we're talking about conditions. Anything other than tide that you really need to pay attention to, or that you suggest someone else pay attention to?
I would just say probably just covering water. I mean, it's important to try those spots that you think are good, but just if it's not working out for you in the first 15, 20 minutes and stuff, just run on to the next spot. And they may not be there at that certain tide, but if you go back at another tide, they may be at that dock. So also don't give up on a dock if you think it's a good one. If you've caught fish there before, maybe it's just not the tide for it. But definitely covering water is going to be your best option for that.
All right. So then I guess we're going to wrap. I imagine we're going to wrap up the podcast with this last little section of questions. So if I'm throwing my shrimp up by a dock and it's getting peppered, I can tell this isn't target species. Are you always just letting it sit and then hoping that it brings a black drum in that sort of moves them out of the way and takes it before the bait's gone? And I guess that's the question that sets up, is a black drum going to describe the black drum bite, I guess, to us?
Well, I mean, the reason why I use that whole shrimp is because, you're getting the bycatch on it, and usually you can feel that bite, the pinfish or the croaker or whatever it may be, trying to eat that bait, and you can tell that there's something small hidden in it, and that's not what you want. Usually when you get a black drum bite, he takes the whole thing. Unless it's a real small one, and even the small ones stump a lot harder than a croaker or a pinfish will. But they'll usually take the whole thing. They suck it in like a vacuum. They want that whole shrimp. And remember, we have them, in the shape of a U, as if they're moving away. So they're pretty like bite size for a good sized black drum. And that's usually what it's going to be. It's going to be a thump, and then it's going to be your rod's bent over. So that's usually how that black drum bite goes. Sometimes you have to set the hook on them a little bit. A lot of times it helps if you don't have a lot of slack in your line, which again leads back to fishing with the current off the back of the boat, and not having that slack in your line so you can feel that bite. And the bycatch bite, you're going to have it. But you'll know when it's that black drum bite. Usually it's a thump, and then he takes it. He'll suck it in like a vacuum. When I start getting those bycatch bites and I start feeling those pinfish biting, I'm usually pulling my shrimp away and I'll recast. They're going to steal a lot of them, and like I said, with black drum, it's a numbers game. How many fish can you catch till we start getting into those drum? And then when you do get into those drum, how many of them are there? Because when they're biting, they're usually a few together. There may not be. Usually when they're in smaller sizes, anywhere from 10 to 15 inches, they're usually kind of traveling together. But when I find those bigger black drum, they're usually all by themselves. And they're biting that whole shrimp. They want the whole thing.
Well, Steve, I think we've come to the natural end of our podcast together. But I always like to sort of put it back to the captain here at the end and say, man, do you have a final thought? Do you have something that you wish you had said when we were talking about earlier topics that didn't quite come up, or something that came to mind as we were talking? I mean, this is the end of your podcast. How do you want to end it?
I would just say, keep plenty of bait. You want to have plenty of bait, whether you're using live shrimp or dead shrimp. You want to have plenty of options, and you're going to cover a lot of water, like I said. So if you're covering all this water and you're throwing all these lines out, I mean, I fish sometimes 4 or 5 rods at a time, depending on where I'm at. You want to have a lot of bait. You want to have, plenty of options for them. You don't want anything to slide out of any creek without being able to see one of your baits, or slide by any oyster rock without seeing one of your baits. So just keep plenty of bait, cover plenty of water, and keep trying those rocks, and, look for the structure, whether it be underwater or something you can see with your eyes, like a dock or a piling or a bulkhead or something, or, just cover that water and keep trying those spots, because you never know what you're going to find sliding by some kind of rock or
all right,
piling or anything.
Captain Steve Von Voigt, Reel 'em Up Fishing Charters out of Southport, Oak Island area, man. Thank you so much for being a guest. Thank you so much for sharing on summertime black drum fishing.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me, y'all. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. You're welcome. Our pleasure. David Harden.
Dear Hurley,
What do you think, man?
I'll tell you what. I'm going to go out next time I'm on a boat. I'm going to go out and look for an older dock with some moving water. Looking for maybe a feeder creek, getting some frozen dead shrimp on a Carolina rig, and I'm gonna get a black drum, and I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna tell you about it.
You better show me a photo, because if you're just going to tell me about a black drum, I'm going to look at you suspiciously. I'm going to say, show me the photo. We're going to begin the conversation with show me the photo.
Show me the photo. Okay, all right. I'll do that first for you.
And make sure you have a short leader on that Carolina rig.
That's right, 1 foot. Number 2 hook.
All right, I'll take that as an acceptable David's best takeaway.
Okay, good.
All right, wrap us up.
Well, just wanted to thank our sponsors, the Port City Signs and Graphics and Marine Warehouse Center. If you'd like to sponsor the podcast, just give us a call at the Fisherman's Post office, and we'll hook you up.
Yeah, man. Again, we love you at Port City Signs and Graphics, Sabrina Davis and crew. They've taken care of Fisherman's Post for over 10 years. And then, I think even more than 10 years for Marine Warehouse Center. They literally keep the Fisherman's Post, my boat, an old boat, a paid for old boat on the water and running every time. It's great. Love those guys. I'll also do my one little plug. Again, if you've enjoyed this podcast and you want to check in and see our bonus content, we're going to continue this conversation with Steve Von Voigt, about 15 minutes of content, some follow-up, some new topics, some circle backs, then member benefits, premium content on the Fisherman's Post website. Plus, you'll get access to the podcast 1 week before the public release. But for right now, this is me saying goodbye. How about you, David?
Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.